Hey everybody, so today we're going to talk about a question that I get asked quite a bit, which is, what do you do on a day-to-day basis as a penetration tester and or ethical hacker? So we're going to cover that. We're going to talk about some of the jobs that I do and go a little bit more detailed on the type of assessment work that we do and even the not so fun stuff like report writing. So before we get started, I do have one favor to ask you guys. If you enjoyed the video at the end, please do hit that like button, please do hit that subscribe button. And if you really do like it, please consider sharing it with a friend as well. Word of mouth is the way we grow. We just hit 4,000 subscribers. I am in debt to all of you. Thank you so much for your constant support and love. So let's go ahead and talk about what I do on a day-to-day basis. All right, we're in front of the computer now because this is going to make things a little bit easier. I can show you some of the tools I use. And you get to see not only me for a second, you get to see my fat cat cleaning herself. I asked her to move out of the screen and she refused. So that's Ava. Enjoy Ava. So some of the things that I do on a day-to-day basis, let's bring this up. So I roll out of bed about 7:55 a.m. I work at 8 o'clock. I end my day typically around 5. I work from home, so I have this luxury of being able to roll out of bed and, just start working pretty much right after I wake up. Very, very nice thing to be able to have. Some other things that we do and that I'm going to talk about are external and internal network assessments. We do web application assessments, wireless assessments, physical social engineering, phishing assessments. We do SOC assessments, or we call those purple teaming assessments. We do report writing, of course, and we do client debriefs. So depending on the day, we're wearing a lot of different hats, and it never is consistent day to day. So I wish I could make a video and just show you the day of and have one consistent roll through, but I don't. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through a brief description of every single little task that I might do in a day, and you can kind of get an idea or a feel for what it's like to be a consultant / penetration tester / ethical hacker. So let's talk about network and internal penetration testing. All right, so I just recorded this whole thing and realized that I muted my microphone. So we're gonna redo this. So let's talk about external and internal penetration testing. So when we talk about external penetration testing, we're talking about hacking from the outside. Internal penetration testing is hacking from the inside. So we're gonna look at this from a very high level. So when we have external penetration testing, we are acting like we are sitting at our computer, because that's what we're doing, and we're using a scope given to us by the client of IP address range. We're going to use our methodology of information gathering, scanning, enumeration, exploitation, etc. So we're going to run through the gamut on the client and hopes of finding a way onto the inside of the network. So some things that we may do without going into too much detail, if we're doing information gathering, typically it's not to do social engineering. That's typically out of scope. But we may gather usernames and breach credentials from the past and do credential stuffing. We may do password spraying if we have the opportunity. We're going to be running Nmap and Nessus to gather some data to put into our report in terms of, or at least to give to the client and to help us out to see what kind of information that we see. Are there any vulnerabilities there, and can we exploit them? So that's where the exploitation comes into play. Now, as a penetration tester, you don't always break in from the outside. That's fine. But there's usually something to report on, whether it's patching or otherwise, that is there that maybe you weren't able to exploit, but at least is some sort of a finding that the client could improve on their security posture. Now, from the inside, it's the same concept, the same methodology. However, you're acting like you have already breached their network. So either you social engineered your way in, you sent them malware and they opened it, you got onto the VPN. Heck, you could have even went in there and plugged directly into their network and left the device and walked away. So what we're assuming is there's some sort of inside threat. Now, the methodology is the same. The tools change a little bit because typically most environments are Active Directory based. So you're running tools now like Responder, tools like Incognito, Kiwi, etc. So you're going to use those tools to try to escalate yourself into whatever the goal of the client is. It may be, hey, go get domain admin. It may be, hey, we've got sensitive PII that we want to see if you can capture, or we've got, we got intellectual property that we want to see if you can find and steal. So it's not always domain admin. At the end of the day, it's just whatever the client wants you to get from that internal side of things. So from a pen test perspective, these are typically 40-hour assessments with report writing included in that. Now, if the client is on the larger side, those may go up to 80 hours or even 120 hours. You may see a 2 or 3 week internal, external per segment, I should say. So typically an external is about 40 hours. The internal can get up to 2 to 3 weeks if it's a really big, large client. On the flip side, you may see some at like 20 hours if they're a very small client. So scoping is important in terms of timing, but typically you're seeing 40 hours per segment here. But if they're a smaller client, you may see 40 hours for the whole gamut that you run on them. Moving on to web application penetration testing, this is where we are testing a web app. So when we're talking about external, internal, you may find a web app running on a server, but you typically leave that alone. You might prod it a little bit, but you're not looking for things like cross-site scripting, for example. That's not something that you would fall into scope for an external, internal, but that would fall into scope for a web application penetration test. So there's a fine line there, and the web app is basically you're assessing that web app and you're prodding it as much as you can to see all the little things that you can find with it. So I have a checklist that's an OWASP checklist. I'll run through that sucker completely through and make sure that I check every single box in that, because there's so many things to look for a web app. So if you are a beginner in penetration testing, you'll probably start out on external assessments. And then once you've built trust, you've got good methodology, you'll get trained up or worked into internal assessments, and eventually you'll work your way into web application penetration testing. There are people that do web app penetration testing solely, they do bug bounties solely, whatever. It's a field all on its own, so it's a good skill to learn. I advocate anybody that's interested in pen testing to learn web app side of it as well, because it opens up more opportunities for you on the job side, and there's just more money there on that as well. The clients are all working towards web app pen tests. I would say more so than network pen tests. Most of my assessments nowadays are fully web app penetration testing. So, and you got to think about it. You may have one client that does and builds or has a bunch of web apps, and they only have the one network to pen test. So you charge them for each different web app that you do, but you only charge them for the one network that you test, right? So you have many more opportunities to earn money and earning potential when it comes to the web app testing. Now on a day-to-day, the methodology stays the same. The tools differ just a little bit. So we're going to be using Burp Suite. Now, if there's anything that I would suggest somebody buy, Burp Suite Pro is probably the one tool that I suggest. If you say, I'm going to buy one tool for a toolkit, what should it be? Burp Suite if you're doing web app pen testing. There's no doubt about it. The free edition does not stack up at all to the Pro edition. We'll also be running Nmap and Nessus, because typically when we do a web app assessment, what we're doing is we're doing an internal and external on that web application as well. So meaning we'll take the IP of that web application server and we'll scan against it, as long as it's owned by the client, right? We'll scan against it and we'll see if there's any ports open other than 80 and 443. What are they running on there? Is something like RDP open for no reason? So you're doing a pen test to see if you can get into that server in any other way outside of the web application. And from the internal side of things as well, you're gonna pen test against anything that might touch that web app. So if it's a load balancer, if it's a server itself, if it's a separate server that interacts with web app, you're gonna do an internal on that. It's gonna be a very limited scope, so it's not gonna apply to the same internal testing that you saw before, with using tools like Responder that we talked about. It's mainly just pen testing against, or scanning and trying to exploit against that internal network. So again, scope for these are typically 40 hours, sometimes 80 hours. I've never seen it under 40 hours, and sometimes they could even go longer. But typically you need a lot of time for a web app because there's so many little nuances and so many boxes to check that you need to make sure you can get through everything. All right, let's step away from the PowerPoint for a minute, and I'm going to show you a wireless card here. So for wireless assessments, we use a wireless card, something like this that's injectable. This is an Alpha AWUS036NH. This is a 2.4 gigahertz card. Some networks are now running on 5 gigahertz, so even for me, this is a little out of date. I need to up my game just a bit, but this works pretty well for most assessments. What we're doing is we're taking one of these, and we'll probably take a GPS dongle with us as well. And most clients are running on WPA2 personal or pre-shared key. So what that means is it's just like a home network, right? So you'll try to go in there and you'll do what's called capturing a 4-way handshake. You'll take that 4-way handshake and try to crack it. You'll try to see what how strong their password is for their network. If you can crack it, you'll start scanning and seeing what's available in that network. Does that network get you anything sensitive, or is it just kind of like its own subset lockdown area? The same thing for a guest network. You're going to log on to a guest network, especially one that's like supposed to be isolated, and see if you can touch internal servers from that guest network, because that's typically a no-no. So there are also WPA2 Enterprise. So you may be using tools like EPAMR or Host APD, but those are very similar, I guess, in process. Really, those are you can look those up and do those in a blog pretty quick. Most of the things you're going to be seeing are WPA2 personal. You may run into evil twin attacks as well. So the methodology is the same. You're still going to do information gathering. If you have to do some sort of password spraying against an enterprise client, you might do that, or even credential stuffing. So important to get that. You'll do scanning again because we're going to look at the network if we get onto it, and maybe even some exploitation, especially of the network password itself. So you'll write a report on that and debrief the client, but we'll cover reporting and debriefing here in a second. All right, and moving on to physical testing. So for physical testing, we can loop this into physicals, as in I'm trying to break and enter. We can loop this into social engineering, which you can use in phishing attacks or vishing attacks, or you can use on the physical side of things as well. So when we talk about the physical assessments, we're doing information gathering, reconnaissance there. We're going to go on Facebook, on Twitter, on LinkedIn. We're going to see what kind of pictures you have out there. Do you have pictures of your desk? Do you have pictures of your badge? What's the company clothing policy? You know, any kind of information we can gather from that aspect is really good. We'll also take a drone and go on site, fly it around the site to see what kind of doors might get propped open, where the smoke areas are at. We'll also do the same thing with like Google satellite images to see what information we can find. And then we'll go on site. We'll either try to, break our way in if we use some sort of, lock picking, or if we can even use a can of air against some sensors. We might do badge cloning, where we clone your badge and use that to break in. We might just social engineer our way in, right? We might just sit outside the smoke area or the break area and chat somebody up and just walk right in with them. You can even walk right through the front door sometimes. So, it's a wide variety of what you get. Typically, when you say physical assessment, you're going on site and trying to get into some sort of critical space, that being a server or whatever the client deems as the critical place they want you to get into. Now, not everybody does physical assessments, but most shops do. And you don't have to do a physical assessment if that makes you uncomfortable. For us, we've got people on our team that don't want to do them, and that just gives us more for the guys who are into doing that. So if you get a rush out of it and you like to do it, please volunteer, because not everybody likes to. And it's just, it's fun. So outside the physical side of things, we also do phishing assessments where we'll send well-crafted emails, or we'll do vishing assessments where we'll call somebody, we'll call help desk and say, hey, I'm so-and-so, I need my password reset, can you let me in? And see where we can get with that. So methodology is still the same. Again, there's exploitation there, and then we're going to write a report on it, and we're going to debrief the client on what we find. Okay, so one other assessment that we do is called purple teaming. This is also known as a SOC assessment. So we take purple teaming by combining red and blue. What that means is we sit down as a red team, we sit down with the blue team, and we run exploits. we say, hey, I'm running this exploit. Do you see this? Typically, we've got a list of 30 to 50 types of activities we can do. We'll let the client pick from that list which ones they want to do. Some of them, for example, are if the client has a NAC, a network access control, and you're able to just plug into their network and they don't see you, that's bad, right? So they should be seeing you. There should be some sort of baselining there, something preventing you. Large file transfers coming in or out of the network. Should they be seeing that? Should their SIM see it? Yeah, probably. So it's fine-tuning things like that. We may upload malware onto a machine and then start running all kinds of commands that an attacker would run to see if they could see those commands. Basically, it's an attack and then, hey, blue team, did you see this attack? And they'll say, yes, I saw it, or no, I didn't see it. So you're really helping them fine-tune their SIM and their baselines, and it really benefits you as well from two different perspectives. One is that when you're doing this and they catch you, you can say, okay, well, how can I make this obfuscated? How can I make it so I'm more quiet and they don't catch me? Or two, when they don't catch you, you can help them fine-tune the blue side of things, and you learn the defensive strategies as well, which makes you just a better consultant overall and a better pen tester. So you really get a lot out of these purple teaming assessments, but they are, at least in my experience, few and far between. I've only done a couple in my time as a pen tester, but I do think they're highly beneficial, and I do recommend them as we can get them. All right, so lastly, let's talk about report writing and debriefing. And before we do that, this is my second run through this, as I said, and I've been recording probably for 3 hours now. The cat has not moved. Look at the size of that cat. She is at least 20 pounds and just a gigantic blob. I don't know how she's still alive. She's so old and so fat and doesn't move. So part of me envies her, I think. But I digress. So when we talk about report writing and we talk about debriefing, so you're going to have a report for every single thing you do. If you looked at the slides and when I commented on the types of assessments, every single one of them included a report and a debrief. So when we talk about client assessments, typically there is a kickoff call before you do any sort of assessment. You're saying, hey, this is what we're planning to do. We're starting the activities. And then you send, kickoff emails while you're actually doing the activities. But once your activities are done, you write your report. And typically that's about 8 hours per 40 hours, I would say. So you have those 8 hours and you improve over time on your report writing. You get a repository of findings that you've had in the past, and you can just kind of, copy and paste and replace and fill in the blanks, right, for the client specifics. But you still have to write the report. And if you're doing multiple assessments, say you have an external, internal, and a web app all for one client, then you have to write 3 reports that you aggregate into one for that client. At the end of the day, you are report writing every time and you're debriefing every time. So you might just debrief one segment. You might debrief the whole report, depending on what you did, right? If you worked on one section and your coworker worked on another section, then you might debrief one and he might debrief the other part of the report. You might debrief the whole thing. It just depends on how your shop runs it. But do know that report writing and debriefing are a big, big part of pen testing and should not go unnoted, right? There's the fun parts where you get to do all the hacking, but then there's okay, I've got to put my consultant hat on and help these people understand at a really high level how I'm going to explain this, or how to fix this, right? So you got to kind of explain it like they're 5 to a lot of them, because it's not always going to be a client where they have high technical knowledge. You're going to have a lot of C-level executives or owners in the room that don't understand from an IT perspective, and that's kind of why they hired you. So you really have to be able to break it down to them as best as you can and really explain what the remediation steps are and what the critical tasks are they need to focus on first. All right, ladies and gentlemen, and that's it. Hopefully I answered some of your questions about what it's like on a day-to-day basis. I know there's not a typical, I go to work, I do this from 9 to 5. Every day is a little bit different, and hopefully that's exciting for some of you that are looking to get into the field, because you wear so many different hats every single day that really, it's never the same thing. It's not monotonous, and that's awesome for me. So if I did answer your questions, please do hit that like button. Please do subscribe, share with a friend. If you got any additional questions, please feel free to comment down below, and I will respond back to you as quickly as I can. So until next time, I'm the Cyber Mentor, and I thank you for joining me.